Well, this is an exciting. Oh, this is an exciting day for us here. Dan Millman is a former world trampoline champion, a Stanford University's gymnastics coach, a martial arts instructor, and an Oberlin College professor. He has authored 18 books, which has been published in 29 different languages. And The Way of the Peaceful Warrior was adapted to film in 2006. Dan now travels all over the world, inspiring millions with his teachings and his books and his philosophy. And we're so honored that you join us today, Dan. Just a quick backstory. As a young man, kind of challenged and struggling with direction, someone gave me a copy of your book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and it changed my life. It inspired me, and I went out and skied all over the world and just really kind of just tried to own every moment. The title of this podcast. And when the pandemic hit, a couple years back, I went right back to that book. I went right back to your teachings and that philosophy, and it really just helped me to put meaning to what was happening in my family, in my life, in my world. So so this is a really, really exciting day. So thank you again.
Well, it's touching to hear that, and I appreciate it, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I've guessed right off the start, I know that you've written 18 books, and I've read a bunch of them. But your website and your teaching is all about a peaceful warrior. And I was wondering if you could just define what is a peaceful warrior, and how does a peaceful warrior live in this moment, in this day, in this time.
Sure, because it sounds like some kind of jargon, a special club you can join, that sort of thing. Actually, when I was teaching at Oberlin College, I was watching that old TV series Kung Fu. You may recall that,
Oh yeah, yes,
with
love.
David Carradine as Kwai Chang King. And I was also teaching a course in Aikido and Tai Chi, those two, the fundamentals of those two different, more internal martial arts. And I titled the course The Way of the Warrior, which makes a lot of sense. They are martial arts, but that didn't quite fit. So the idea came to me, why don't I call it Way of the Peaceful Warrior? And that's when I came up with that term kind of organically. It wasn't until years later that I wrote a book and wasn't sure what to call it. And that came up, Way of the Peaceful Warrior. What a peaceful warrior refers to, and I mean this very deeply and sincerely, is it refers to each and all of us. It's not some club you can join. Each of us is striving to live with a peaceful heart, but there are times in our life we have to acknowledge we need a warrior's spirit. It's not about fighting, except perhaps the inner battles we sometimes face. But so it really, that's why many people, men and women, equal numbers, who show up to all my seminars, pretty much 50-50. Um, it really applies to human beings who are striving or stumbling toward the light. We're all on a spiritual quest, whether or not we're fully conscious of it, to find meaning and purpose and even a connection to some kind of transcendent reality, life's bigger picture. So that is the defining characteristic of my work, but there's much more to it, of course.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a good segue. In today's world, if there's so much political division and suffering and pain in this, the worldwide pandemic and hundreds and hundreds of news channels all driving 24 hours a day and social media, so much noise. How do we stay present? What in today's world and today, how do we be a peaceful warrior? What does your teaching tell us? How do we do this?
Well, there are two elements of this. And remember, all any teacher, any author can do is share perspectives, observations, and reminders about life's bigger picture. Things we already know at a deeper level, but we tend to forget. You know, Cesare Pavese once said, or maybe it was Andre Gide, he said, everything that needs to be said has already been said, but it needs to be said again because no one was really paying attention. And the times, the adversity and the difficulties we face in everyday life and historically right now during this period, um, it gets our attention. And so, I've never seen adversity without hidden gifts. Sometimes I ask audiences, Peter, how many of you have experienced physical, emotional, or mental pain in your life? Of course, all the hands go up. And I welcome disagreement, but I hope we can all agree that adversity and difficulty each of us has faced in our lives, maybe small, maybe large. It's made us a little bit wiser, a little bit stronger, and maybe even more compassionate, a sense of perspective. So we don't have to pretend to like difficulties when they happen. No one needs to pretend the pandemic's been fun. But there's a principle that constraints breed creativity. And this has been a creative time. It's shifted our societies. My talking to you on Zoom, which everybody's used to doing now, and doing remote kinds of things, it may change the structure of our society. So there will be good things to come out of it, developments, innovations. I view life as a spiritual boot camp, a spiritual school. Earth is like a divine school for souls, if you will, and daily life is our classroom. And in a way, daily life could be viewed as a form of spiritual weight training. If you don't lift any weights, you don't get any stronger. So I think it's good to appreciate, at least, not pretend to like adversity or difficulty, but to recognize that it does have hidden gifts. And we faced past challenges, and in the same way we did that, we're still here. We can face the challenges that we meet today. So yeah, it's been difficult for all of us in different ways, depending on our circumstances. For some people, much worse. In fact, many of us have been fortunate to get through this period, not too worse off. Some may be even better off. It's hard to say, but there you have it.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. That I love that daily life is a spiritual training, as a weight training, as a and I guess my question would be, what do you see? What are we training for? What's the outcome are we training for? Like, when you're a gymnast, you're training to win the gold medal, or if I'm training, yeah. So what are we training for?
Well, that's a good question, and it leads me to recite a kind of list. When I was doing a book tour for one of my books called The Life You Were Born to Live, it's about life purpose.
Yes.
I didn't want people to think that's all I was about, because it's based on certain principles with a date of birth and so on. And I asked myself, what's the bigger picture here? What is personal growth, what we call personal development? And if life is a school, what courses do you have to pass to graduate? It's a good question.
Yeah.
And so what appeared to me were 12 courses in the School of Life, what we're here to do. And we think what we're here to do is develop a good relationship and maybe a successful career and those other things of life. But actually, all those things that we do, the duties, challenges, and goals in everyday life, are here to teach us about these 12 areas. So we mature as human beings. Because before we can become spiritual, we have to become fully human. And our training ground involves 12 areas. Let me just recite a list. I wrote a thick book that goes over these 12 areas called Everyday Enlightenment. But first is discover our worth. In other words, our innate worth as human beings. This deals with avoiding self-sabotage and so on, to start to see our worth and value that as human beings. So we start to open to opportunity rather than get into sabotaging ourselves or getting in our own way. The second has to do with reclaiming our will. Many people, it's like, I wish I had more self-discipline, that sort of thing. The third area is energizing our body. And these are foundation areas: self-worth, reclaiming our will, and energizing our body. That provides a foundation for what comes next. The fourth area is managing our money. Most of us are preoccupied, getting it, saving it, having it, whatever. Money is not something you can bypass. And the fifth is taming our mind, and I have a very different take than many people on what that means. The sixth area is trusting our intuition rather than just one side of our brain, the analytical part, which is good and useful. We also have to begin to trust that kind of inner knower.
Mm.
And then it goes into accepting our emotions, facing our fears, illuminating our shadow, which is about self-knowledge. And finally, embracing our sexuality, because you can't ignore that area either. And then awakening our heart. And the 12th area is serving our world, finding a way to connect with other people through service. So those are, you asked the question, so
Yeah.
there you have
Yeah.
it. That's the bigger picture of what we are doing in everyday life. We're learning about these areas, and it's like whack-a-mole. One comes up, there's a problem, and then that's better, and then another one comes up. But that again is the bigger picture. There's many details within each of those areas that we work on.
Yeah.
And this isn't an added burden to anybody. This
Yeah.
is what we're already doing in everyday life.
Yeah.
All these areas will come up. So that's my response to your question.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, that's, I wonder if I could pinpoint on one of them just because it seems like, I have two young boys and, and looking at the future and whatnot and talking to other parents and, there's a lot of fear right now. There's a lot of people that are afraid there and living from that place. And I wonder, you said one of the 12 is taming your own fear. And I wonder if you could share some tools that to do that, for people that are living from that place.
Sure. And fear is a natural emotion. It's perfectly appropriate to feel fear at times. But, the boxing coach, Cus D'Amato, once said, heroes and cowards feel exactly the same fear. They just respond differently. So our goal is not to not feel fear. I feel afraid sometimes, nervous, anxious about different things. Not as much as I used to, but it's not something that goes away permanently in any sense of the word. Emotions pass through us like the weather. Fear, sorrow, anger, happiness, pleasure, all kinds of emotions pass through us all the time. But there is a way to live, in a sense, liberated from whatever we happen to be feeling. For example, fellow came to me once and he was too afraid of meeting other people. He didn't know how to face his fears. So I gave him an assignment to do one of those high ropes courses. I don't know if you're familiar with those, Peter,
Yeah,
and many of your listeners might be. But, one of them involves climbing a pole about 30 feet high, like a 10-meter diving tower. It's climbing this pole. And then somehow you got to stand up on it, get up from your chest level up to that pole, stand up, turn, and then leap off it, grabbing a trapeze about 6 feet away. Of course, you're wearing a harness, you're tethered, someone's holding you up, so there's no way really to get hurt, but it's very scary. Anybody who's done it knows this. I have, certainly. So he went over the weekend. I gave him an assignment, and he came back the next day and he said, or the next week, he came back and said, well, I failed. And I said, oh, really? So you weren't able to climb the pole? He said, oh, no, I climbed the pole. And I said, oh, then you really couldn't really stand up on it. That's a hard thing to do, to get up on your feet. He said, no, I got up on my feet. I stood up. I said, oh, but it was the trapeze. Is that what stopped you? No, I turned and I leaped off and grabbed the trapeze. I said, I'm missing something here. And he said, well, I failed because I was afraid the whole time. He mistook the idea of being afraid for being a coward, but it was what he performed. It's not about not feeling fear. So anxiety about the future, our children are out there, our grandchildren, in my case, and sure, our nerve endings are right out there. We wonder what their lives may be, but why suffer from forethought of grief, as one poet put it? We're living right now in a vibrant time. We're lucky enough to be alive. We we can project our minds into the past and future if we wish, which we often do as a bad habit, too much. But we have that capacity to imagine, to remember. We have the capacity. We can play with objects and physical things in our lives. Technologies that have been developed, like this one, that allows me to share with you and your audience. We have so many benefits in terms of relationships, friends, adversaries, all this interaction. We have the ability to move and to impact our environment. So many things we must relinquish at death. So in fact, I've created on my website, for example, at peacefulwarrior.com, a meditation, a 4-minute meditation, which I've been teaching after practicing it for a year and a half. I began to teach on the process of dying. And people might say, oh, who's going to go, oh, I'm so there, a death meditation. However, first of all, it helps clear the fear of death and the unknown, but also it helps us like nothing else I've done to appreciate life right now and our children's lives and the richness of life. So sure, it's natural to have fear, anxiety, but that's just part of the life experience.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's man, that message needs to be spread far and wide. You know, going into that, I heard a story that you were telling as I was, looking into you, researching, and you were saying that it was when you were the gymnast and your teacher Socrates, who you call in the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and you were saying that he you tell it better, but you stuck a landing and you felt amazing, and maybe you could. I guess the quote was, he
Oh,
said,
I'll tell the story.
"Yeah, please. I love this story. It just
Sure.
yes,
I'll tell it briefly. Socrates and I, my old mentor, for those who don't know me or my work, you've heard Peter introduce me as a former coach and college professor and so on. I have, of course, a new memoir, as you know about Peter. We can
yes,
mention that later, but
yes,
that will tell the whole story. In any case, the story goes like this. Socrates, the old gas station mechanic and sage of a sort, we were in the gym, and I was swinging around the horizontal bar, and I did a dismount, twisting double somersault. And I stuck my landing, which is a good thing, kind of like boom, like that. So then I figured that was a good place to stop for the evening. So I ripped off my sweatshirt, threw it in my bag, and we were walking down the hallway afterward. And he turned to me and said, "Oh, that last move you did was really sloppy." And I said, "What are you talking about, Sock? It was one of the best dismounts I've done in a long time." He said, "Oh, I'm not talking about the dismount. I'm talking about the way you took off your sweatshirt and put it in your bag." And he reminded me in that I was treating one moment as special, flying off the horizontal bar. I was treating another moment as ordinary. So he reminded me once again, there are no ordinary moments. Every moment counts. And the quality of our moments become the quality of our lives. But then he added something. And I actually got this line into the movie, the last minute, when the director agreed to put it in. He said, "Dan, the difference between us is you practice gymnastics. I practice everything." Daily life was his practice, walking, breathing, standing, eating, refining constantly over time. Can I do this better? How many of us try to refine our signature when we sign something and do it better than we did last time? Now, why would we want to do that? Because when you practice something, rather than just doing it, you have the commitment to make it better and improve and refine, which brings you into an absorptive state in that moment. People ask me, how do I live in the present moment? You don't try to live in the present moment. You simply focus on practicing whatever you do. And it's not some, never-ending self-improvement program. It's just kind of a natural thing in life. And in that, you go into the flow, into the zone more. You don't have to be an athlete flying off the horizontal bar or playing a sport, though those things are pleasurable because they do draw us into the moment. And so there is something essentially pleasurable and peaceful about living in this moment rather than letting the mind flit constantly from the past to the future, which are essentially illusions. All we have is this moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of a quote that it was a simple that a teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, and he was I was reading his book and angsty and looking for answers, and he said, don't do the dishes to get the dishes done, do the dishes to do the dishes, and it reminds me of what you're talking about, and I love that story so much because the reason that I started this podcast and started coaching people on owning every moment is because of that's we're here right now. We're here, and I just love that so much. So I know that you have grandchildren, and children, and as you look to the future, as you look to the future of our planet and future of their time on this earth, and what they're going to experience, what is your hope for humanity? What is your hope for their experience, and what do you believe will happen and hope will happen?
Well, one of my recent martial arts master teachers said, in combat, like in life, there is only one thing you can predict. It will not go as predicted. There are too many variables. So the truth, most candidly, I could say, I have no idea how things will unfold. Good things will happen, bad things will happen. And that's why we're all peaceful warriors in training. So yes, I'd like to give some platitudinous, life is going to expand and evolve and into a new age of whatever. But what we have is now. Um, there is no such thing as future happiness because the future never comes. It's always the future. We're either happy now or we're not. And, one of the best things about going to college, you find out it doesn't make you happy. There are people who never went to college who might believe, if only I'd gone to college, I'd be happy. If only I had found my soulmate or improved my relationship, I'd be happy. If only I had children, I'd be happy. If only I hadn't had children, I'd be happy. If only I made more money, I'd be happy. If only I had more respect, I'd be happy. If only I retired, I'd be happy. If only I traveled more. If only, until we recognize happiness is a practice we get better at over time. Happiness is what we bring to life, not just some good feeling that descends upon us and waiting for that. One of the surest ways to be unhappy is checking out. Am I happy yet? It's like weighing ourselves every hour. So I'd like to make some positive statement, and I certainly could. Let me put it this way in response to your question. There's a Serbian proverb that says, two men looked out of prison bars. Could be two women, but one saw mud and the other saw stars. Mud and stars both exist in our lives. You can't ignore the mud or deny it, or you'll step in it. But where do you want to put your attention? To remember the stars are there, the potential, the hope. And I do have hope. Humanity seems to be, it's like the 11th hour in 58th, 59th minute. That's when humanity comes through. It won't happen automatically. There are very, very many people out there working hard in this time of disinformation, misinformation, blind belief, conspiracy theories. I recognize that's the mud. And we continue living our lives as an example. Albert Schweitzer said, in influencing other people, example is not the main thing. It's the only thing. So for our children, for future generations, we can only do our best. That's what the Buddha, apparently his last words were. They said, can you have any last advice? And he was dying, and he just said, just do your best. And by definition, each day we do our best,
Yeah.
Some days I do better than others, but each day I do the best I can with what I'm working with that day. So we need to be gentle with ourselves as well. We're all human, and we're doing what we can. So I think a place of self-respect for our own process is important, and occasionally um, giving ourselves a pat on the back or a little hug.
Going back to your 12 classes that we're embarking on, the last class, the service to others. I wonder if you, I mean, I know you've lived your life of service of others. How does someone that's working 9 to 5, like what do I have to offer people? What can I do? I mean, I wonder if you have any words of advice for people that are just like, yeah, I want to do that, but where, how?
Sure. Well, I think many people undersell themselves. They don't realize that let's say they work in an auto assembly plant, screwing bolts in. Of course, robots do a lot of that now, but they're doing a job they wouldn't consider creative or important. It's just getting a paycheck. But if they didn't do their job or did it wrong, someone would suffer. We all connect with other people. I knew one woman who was independently wealthy. She never needed to work, but she worked in a small bookstore because she loved books and liked to recommend them to people and help them find books. And, so I think we all are doing something. Um, for example, when I go to a new city to speak, to lecture or whatever, I haven't done that for a while. I'm starting to travel more again, little by little. But if I see a piece of paper on the ground and a can, I'll just pick it up and deposit it in the trash. So I can't know the impact of my words in that town, but I do know it's going to be a little cleaner when I leave it. So the little things can become very big in the eyes of spirit. Small things, holding a door for someone, saying a kind word, a smile. This morning, I was walking around Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York, where I live, and when people would walk by me, I'd give them a smile, and they smile back. Sometimes I work at the Park Slope Food Co-op. I do a shift, as part of the co-op thing, and if I'm at the entrance, I'll say, "Hey, welcome," and people really like that. They perk up. Rather, how many times you go into a market and they say, "Welcome." Um, Little things like that can make a big difference. So it's not like we have to do, Mother Teresa said it best. We cannot all do big things, but we can do small things with big love.
Yeah.
And so I think, that's why my favorite film is disguised as a rom-com, but it's one of the most profound films ever. It's called Groundhog Day.
Yeah, I love Groundhog Day.
And the reason Groundhog Day, if one of your viewers hasn't seen it, with Bill Murray and Ani McDowell, if they haven't seen it, I recommend it as a refresher. And again, this guy evolves. He lives the same day over and over, and he learns. And apparently, somebody calculated he must have lived 10,000 years the same day. And he gets more skill. First, he exploits everything and steals money and does all this because he knows what's going to happen. But in living that same day, he tries to kill himself 50 times, but nothing works. He wakes up at 6 every morning and lives that same day. But finally, the only thing left in his life is service. It's the only game in town. Yeah. He finally evolves to the point when there's nothing left. That's what gives meaning to life, is doing little things for people, whether it's a kid falls from a tree, he knew where he was going to fall, so he grabs them every day. That kind of thing. Changing a tire for some elderly ladies who have a flat tire. We can all do little things, and that's enough. We don't necessarily have to do some big thing or be a medical doctor or in one of the helping professions. All of us can do that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love it.
It feels good.
Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, and I think it yeah, in any moment you can be helpful in your actions, and that's inspiring.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions. One is, as we look forward, and we're talking a little bit, kind of, is there any people or any people that are inspiring you that you're reading or watching or speaking with or teaching with that you're like, this person is on it. They have it. They know what's happening. They got a good message.
Well, as I acknowledge in the memoir coming up, They say behind every man is a good woman. Well, I'll tell you, people think I'm joking when I say most of my life these days is keeping up with my wife, Joy. Um, she has been a great role model for me. When we first met, I was a college professor. She was a senior, about to graduate. And so I had the status and I was, the professor. But really, in our lives today, in my mind, she is my primary role model and North
Mm.
Star, my source of feedback. She keeps me uh, sharing perspective. And in terms of service, nobody outdoes her. Everybody in our family knows she's always there for everyone. So she's been a great example, role model for me. And that's why I've written about some strong woman characters in some of my books. In Sacred Journey of the Peaceful Warrior, there's a Kahuna
Mm.
woman named Mama Chia, and in other books, there's an ageless woman sage in the Laws of Spirit. So I really acknowledge the importance of everyone. And some people think we live in a patriarchy, but I believe we're making a balancing shift to acknowledging diversity of people, and certainly whatever sex or gender someone identifies with. There are people around us. That's what I'm really saying. People close to us, like my wife. So that's who I'd say inspires me daily.
Nice. So I know your last book came out, I think in 2017, the hidden classroom, or the
In
hidden
school,
hidden
yeah,
schools. Yes, sorry, hidden schools.
yeah.
And so, would you tell us a little bit more about the upcoming memoir, and the theme, and when we can get it and what's happening?
Well, there has been some ambiguity for people who've read Way of the Peaceful Warrior and some of my other books, which blend fact and fiction. But this memoir, which is subtitled The True Story of My Spiritual Quest,
Hmm.
and that's what it's about. It's not just about moi, about me. People who don't know me, why would they want to read that? But this really is a classic book on the various paths along the spiritual quest. Bit of a cautionary tale, but also um, can help people maybe illuminate their path as well. So, Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit, appropriately titled,
Yeah.
and it is the true story. So there's no fiction in it, there's no blend. This is as accurately as I can state it,
Wow.
including the four master teachers who I call the professor, the guru, the warrior priest, and the sage. Over a 20-year period, I studied with one, then the next, then the next. And they represent different facets of this quest or search. So that's all I would say about the book now. It's available for pre-order if anybody wants to. They get one of the first copies. But I hope it's a memoir that will touch many people. I worked hard on it. I'm recording the audiobook actually for the next couple of weeks.
Oh, nice. You're doing the voice. You're oh,
Yes.
beautiful, beautiful. Well, that's exciting. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm gonna do that right
Fantastic.
now. Um, and then people can go to your website, www.peacefulwarrior.com.
Sure.
And I know there's a lot of great teachings up there. So my last question kind of harkens back to a little bit. You were talking about this meditation, that you focus on your own dying and your own death. And I wonder if I could just put you in a place of, you've lived 150 years or however long you're going to live, and you're in your favorite place, and there's nothing more to be done. You're ready to roll. You're ready to go to the next experience. What do you think Dan Millman's legacy will be, or what do you hope it will be, and do you think about that at all when you do those meditations on dying, of what you leave behind?
Well, some years ago, when I was in the midst of my career, I'd written about 10 books at the time, and I was speaking all over the place. Joy, my wife, said, Dan, it may be that with all the books you've written and the talks you've given and lives you've touched, it may be that the most important thing you've done is help raise our daughters.
Mm.
And they'll be making their own contributions in their own ways. And in some sense, I think there is some precious thing about family. And like many fathers, many I was dedicated to my work, my calling, my career, didn't give it as much time and attention, though I was a pretty good dad still, as I might have. So I think it is important, family. You know, a man came to me once after reading Peaceful Warrior and said, Dan, after reading your book, I want to make time for spiritual practice, but I have a wife and 3 children and a full-time job. So how do I find the time? He came to understand his wife, his family, his full-time job was his primary spiritual practice. And the things of everyday life will develop us more than sitting in a cave and meditating. I know because I've done both.
Yeah, yeah. I have a 10 and 7 year old boy, and um,
Wow.
yeah, that's a perfect message for me personally. Just being like, that's my practice. That's my that's my calling right there. Is being present with them. So thank you. Well, thank you, Dan, so much.
My
It's just,
pleasure.
I mean, it's just so inspiring to talk with you and what you've given to everybody through your work and your teaching and yeah, yeah. Please get the book and more information at his website. And thank you so much.
Thank you for the work you do, Peter. It's been a delight.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye bye.